A very good morning to my dear students. Today we are going to deal with the third chapter in the third unit in your course book. It is a beautiful poem entitled as Sympathy. So before going to get into the poem, let me to discuss something common about the poem. The poem entitled Sympathy describes the incident that happened to the poet. Before going to get into the poem, let us discuss the meaning of sympathy. It can generally be taken as a feeling of pity and sorrow for someone else's misfortune. So here also, the poet is in sorrow, or he is in a misfortune that he really needs someone's attention or help. Thus, here in this poem, we can say that the poet describes one incident and two contrasting outcomes to that one incident. The incident is, while we are getting into the poem, you can understand, you will come to know what is actually the incident. The poet is in deep distress, and how two people approach the situation in two different ways. So if you look at the textbook, we can find a question given at the beginning. What is the question given there? If it happens that you are in serious trouble, what would you expect as help? If you are in a serious trouble, what would you expect as help? What would you expect as help? That question triggers attention here. Or in other words, we can say that the quintessence of the entire poem can be briefly absorbed in that particular question. The question is up to us, up to the readers, and at this question mark, the poem begins here. Now let us move on to the poem as a whole. So I am going to read the poem. So listen. I lay in sorrow, in deep distress. My grief a proud man heard. His looks were cold. He gave me gold, but not a kindly word. My sorrow passed. I paid him back the gold he gave to me. Then stood erect and spoke my thanks and blessed his charity. I lay in want and grief and pain. A poor man passed my way. He bound my head. He gave me bread. He watched me night and day. How shall I pay him back again for all he did to me? Oh, gold is great, but greater far is heavenly sympathy. The poem, as I said in the beginning, is all about how two different people reacted to a same situation differently. Here in this poem, we can find a completely broken man. Having been seen such a broken man, how the rich man reacted and how the poor man reacted, and whose sympathy is of great value here. Is it the sympathy of the rich man, or is it the sympathy of the poor man? Anyway, let us go for a detailed discussion to find out what is actually the more valuable sympathy according to the poet as mentioned in the poem. Now I am going to read the first stanza. Listen. I lay in sorrow, in deep distress. My grief a proud man heard. His looks were cold. He gave me gold, but not a kindly word. Here, when the poem begins, we can find the poet in deep distress. And he says that means the poet says that a proud man heard his suffering. That means a rich man offered him some help. The poet again goes on to say that at the very next line, through the powerful use of the word called, the poet conveys that what kind of a person the rich man was. Yeah, he was a called person. What do you mean by a called person here? Yeah, a person lacking affection or warmth of feeling. Simply we can say that unemotional. The poet says that even though he heard his grief, even though the rich man heard the poet's grief, he was not emotional. Why the poet came to such a conclusion that the rich man, even though the rich man heard the poet's grief, he was not emotional? Why the poet came to such a conclusion? Yeah, instead of empathizing with him, or instead of saying a kind word, he offered him some money. So instead of giving him, or instead of saying a kind word, yeah, the man offered him only some money. That's why he was being forced to come to such a conclusion that he was not emotional. Thus, in the first stanza, we can find a rich man offering money to the poet to treat himself, as he was found in need of help. This, according to the poet, is the first type of charity. The charity consisting of providing financial assistance to the disadvantaged. The last line in the first stanza, look at the last line. Yeah, the last line in the first stanza clearly conveys the fact that the poet, more than a physical help, expects something more. And this dissatisfaction of the poet is given emphasis in the last line of the first stanza as not a kindly word. So it is clear that the poet expects some emotional assistance than physical assistance. He does not offer the poet any word of encouragement that will give him courage and strength, because he is proud of his wealth. So in any situation, he does not believe that there is any event his wealth will fail to come to use. Therefore, he cannot conceive how to help the poet in any other way than to provide him with money. Now, let us move on to the second stanza. Here I am going to read the second stanza. Please listen. My sorrow passed. I paid him back the gold he gave to me, then stood erect and spoke my thanks and blessed his charity. So, here in this stanza, the poet is saying that as a result of proper medical care received with the money from the rich man, the poet is able to recover his health. When he became healthy, he paid the money back and expressed his thank for his charity. So, my sorrow passed. I paid him back the gold he gave to me. So, when the poet became healthy, when the poet became normal, he paid the money back to the rich man. Then stood erect. Erect means straight. Then stood straight and spoke my thanks and blessed his charity. So he expressed his his gratitude for the rich man's charity. Now we can move on to the third stanza. Now I am going to read the third stanza. Listen. I lay in want and grief and pain. A poor man passed my way. He bound my head. He gave me bread. He washed me night and day. Here in this stanza, the same situation is portrayed again. The poet is again in pain or in grief. Suddenly, a poor man came. The poor man had no money to offer the poet. So he was being forced to look for other ways to help the poet. So he gave him bread, at the same time sat with him day and night. So as it is seen in the picture, we can find that we can come to the conclusion that as the poor man saw the poet just went to the poet's side and sat with him and gave him all kinds of physical and mental or physical and emotional support throughout the day and night. So one thing is clear from here is that the poor man knew that the poet was experiencing pain and sorrow. Maybe he had also experienced those emotions at some point or the other in his life. That might be the reason the poor man could understand the feeling of the poet than any other person or than the rich man. So he knew clearly that the poet needs to be taken care of both physically and emotionally. That is why we can find the picture of the poor man treating the poet's injuries, giving him food and drink, and also talking to him in the third stanza. So the poet says that this sympathy met his physical needs as well as his emotional needs. So now we can move on to the last stanza. Here I am going to read the last stanza. Please listen. How shall I pay him back again for all he did to me? Oh, gold is great, but greater far is heavenly sympathy. So here in the last stanza, when the poem is about to end, the poet values the two ways of helping others, and he values the poor man's method as more sublime than the rich man's. He expresses its sublimity through a thought-provoking question: how shall I pay him back again for all he did to me? The poet underlines the fact that it is beyond price. It is beyond any reward. In the first case, the poet could pay the rich man, the poet could pay the money back to the rich man when he became healthy. But this is beyond price. That means when it comes to the second person, when it comes to the poor man, yeah, this is beyond price. He can never pay it back, because the proud man had only provided the poet with some material help in the form of money. It is easy for the poet to repay on him. On the other hand, the poor man provided the poet with the kind of help that does not have physical manifestation. That is why he is asking at the end that how shall I pay him back again for all he did to me. So the poet concludes his ideas in one utterance that God is great. Yeah, as you all know, money, the poet says that I value the money. It is great. But greater is heavenly sympathy. Yeah. Even though money is great, I value something more to heavenly sympathy than to the money. The money is great, I admit the truth, but yeah, the heavenly sympathy has got some predominance than the greatness of money. It is somewhat greater than money, as it fills both the poet's physical and emotional needs, as it is priceless. So this is the poem is all about. Now, apart from the literal side, let us go for a clear analysis of the content of the poem with regard to the application of poetic devices used in and across the poem. Now listen. As we get into the poem, we can find that the poem is written in an appealing structure where the entire poem is written into 4 stanzas having 4 lines each, which revolves around a particular idea. And we can also find that the poem strictly follows ABCB rhyming scheme. So if you look at the first stanza, we can find that distress and gold, they are not rhyming with each other, but herd and word is rhyming with each other. So in that way we get the rhyming pattern as A, B, C, B. And again, if you look at the second line in the first stanza and the last 2 lines in the last stanza, we can find that the poet widely takes the advantage of transposed sentences in the poem. What do you mean by transposed sentences? Yeah, transposition means when we say that it is transposed, we can find that they are interchanged. So transposition here mean interchanging with each other. When you analyze the second line in the first stanza, we can find that it is written as my grief a proud man heard, instead of saying that a proud man heard my grief. A proud man heard my grief is actually grammatically correct and it is actually the right way to speak of. But instead of following a grammatical sense, poet presents the sentence in another way, in a transposed way. So what is its relevance here in this poem? Yeah, it is used, or such a transposed sentence, such a transposed line is used there in the poem just to give emphasis to the fact that the poet is in grief and he needs somebody's assistance. And the same idea is applied in the last 2 lines through the technique of transposition. Look at the last 2 lines. It is written there that greater far is heavenly sympathy, but it is not the right way to speak of. It does not have a grammatical sense at all. But even though it does not have a grammatical sense, the writer prefers the poet preferred to write the line in such a way, greater far is heavenly sympathy, instead of what, instead of heavenly sympathy is far greater. So here also the poet wanted to glorify the value of heavenly sympathy instead of the greatness of money. That is what. So in order to just give emphasis to the value of heavenly sympathy, the writer cleverly takes use of such a transposed sentence, not transposed sentence, such a transposed line in his poem. Okay, and as we get into the second and third stanza, we can find metonymical usages like gold and bread respectively. What do you mean by metonymy, or what do you mean by metonymical usage? Yeah, a part stands for a whole. So for example, if we want to say about a king, we only use the word crown. So crown is actually the metonymical usage. Crown stands for what? Crown stands for king. So similarly, if you want to say about peace, yeah, we definitely portray the image of a pigeon. If we want to say something about heroism, we will definitely portray the image of eagle. So eagle can stand for heroism and pigeon can stand for peace. So in that way, here gold and bread are respectively the examples of metonymical usages that we can find in the poem. Here gold means money and bread means some food items. So gold stands for money, as in olden days coins are used instead of money, and bread also instead of food. Another foremost device which takes advantage throughout the entire poem is the use of contrast. As you all know, the entire theme of the poem is presented with the help of a powerful contrast. Yes, two images are being compared each other here in this poem. The image of rich man on one side and the image of poor man on the other side. And through this contrast, the poet communicates the central theme of the poem as such. The theme of the physical and emotional needs of a man throughout the portrayal of these two different ways of charity. The poem is so beautiful as it revolves around both the physical and emotional needs of a man. Poet here indirectly says that when a man is going through a tough time, it is not just his body but also his mind that has to be taken care of. Just as a man must keep up his immunity in order to be able to recover from injuries and diseases, he must also be mentally strong so that no situation makes him feel helpless. And the message the poet wanted to convey to the audience or to the readers through the beautiful portrayal of the condition of this man is nothing but the fact that if we really want to help a man, we must look after both their needs, the physical and the emotional needs as such. So this is a message of this beautiful poem written by the famous Scottish poet Charles Mackay. So this is all about the poem. So you have to go through the poem thoroughly and try to familiarize with the theme of the poem. And meanwhile, you feel any kind of doubts, you can contact me. Anyway, everything will be cleared in the interactive session. Anyway, you have to go through the question answers and try to find out all the answers of those questions given at the end of this poem. So the poem is very simple, so you can find out all the answers by yourself. So this is all about today's class. Anyway, thank you and have a nice day.